Our government feels this way as well. The display of the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights, just to give you an idea of how valuable our government views those actual documents, the actual first copies, if you will, they are displayed at the, there's an archive of, there's a Department of Archives, there's an archive museum. They're displayed in a massive bronze-framed, bulletproof, moisture-controlled glass container, vacuum-sealed in a rotunda by day, and in a multi-ton bomb-proof vault by night at the National Archive building. Furthermore, if doomsday were to happen, and it seems like doomsday is something that's been on the brain the past couple of weeks, but if doomsday were to happen and the world were to break out in a nuclear war, nuclear conflict, and the U.S. was involved, those documents would be one of the very first things in this country to be put into a shelter. Specifically, they would be moved to the Mount Weather Emergency Operations Station. That they are so valuable that they receive the utmost security in times of need. Now, granted, some of the things I just said you already knew about because many of you watched, National Treasure with Nicolas Cage? And he, of course, stole the Declaration of Independence. Not really. But we understand that with those documents, even though the literal financial, the physical financial value of those documents is rather small in that it's just parchment or paper. There's not gold hidden in the Declaration of Independence. It's not as if you're going to come up with some way to provide massive amounts of energy through those things. While the physical value of those documents is very small, they are very valuable to us as a country, to our government, so valuable that they receive the highest security, that we treasure those things. And that in this National Archives building, I've not been to it personally, but you can go and view those things. In fact, it's one of the most popular attractions in the country. It's one of the most popular that's sponsored by the state. We consider these things valuable. And so we hold them at the forefront of our mind. We protect them, both in a physical way and perhaps in a more intellectual, psychological, governmental way, where there are debates about what it means and trying to uphold those things. And so because we place our value there, we give it our attention. Because we place our value as a country in those documents, they deserve respect. They earn our respect. They earn a special treatment, and they earn our focus. It's with this sort of mindset that Jesus delivers what we know as Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 21. We're going to read it again. I realize we just read it as a part of the scripture reading, but it's in this context where people treasure physical things, or people have things that they consider very valuable to them, that Jesus says what he says here in Matthew chapter 6. Let's read it together one more time. Matthew 6, picking up in verse 19, reads, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, but where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." We're going to take a look this morning at these three verses and just see what Jesus has to say about these earthly treasures versus more spiritual treasures, if you will. First of all, he says here, do not lay up treasures on earth in verse 19. Now, to give us some context as to why Jesus describes the destruction of these things the way that he does, we need to understand that most ancient valuables consisted of either precious metals or fine cloths. Right? Either precious metals, which many of which are still considered precious today, things like gold, silver, and whatnot, or fine cloths. Specifically, women's clothing was considered to be very, very precious. At least certain types of women's clothing were. And if you think about the moth and the rust that's mentioned in the verse, it makes a lot of sense. Rust can take out most of these metals, and moths can take out the clothes. And of course he mentions here thieves can steal, which with any actual earthly physical possession, that's always a risk. Be it Nicolas Cage with the Declaration of Independence or otherwise. that if it is a thing, it can be stolen. If it is physical, it can be taken from you. Kelsey and I, within the span of just a few months of each other, had a few things stolen. There's a news article floating around about Kelsey, how Kelsey had her car stolen a couple of years ago, and about how there were a whole bunch of books that were from, Feed the Children? Feed the Children. She got interviewed. It was great. She didn't think it was great, but it was great. About 2 years ago now, I had stuff stolen out of my car, out of my driveway. I'd left my car unlocked overnight. You'd think that the car belonging to the house right behind the church building, this was while we're in Hera, the car belonging to the house right behind the church building wouldn't be a target, but alas, I woke up and my wallet was gone and 2 tablets were gone. If it is a physical thing, we understand that it can be taken. But more than that, Jesus here, and while he doesn't say it explicitly, we understand it in the context of physical things versus spiritual things. More than that, even if I can lock it down on this earth, I don't get to take it with me. You can't take it with you. When you die, you don't get to take it with you. I've heard many preachers say this before, and I tend to echo them in saying that everything physical on this earth is flammable. You might not be able to set it on fire. You might not be able to burn it up or melt it. But ultimately, that's what will happen. That you can't take it with you. And so Jesus says, don't put stock in those things. Don't lay those things up as treasures. He's not instructing against wealth here necessarily. He's not saying don't be rich. He's not saying don't have stuff. But it's a warning against hoarding. It's a warning against putting your stock in things. Not just hoarding in the sense of those people that you might see on TV and get a half hour's entertainment out of, but taking things and saying, I'm just going to hold on to this because I consider it valuable. Having so many different things that are a result of that. Putting your stock, putting your worth, putting your value, putting perhaps even your identity into those things that you have. He's saying, don't put yourself into those things. Don't put stock into those things. Don't lay up treasures in those things. Don't do this. But he says in verse 20, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. And so the question then becomes, what treasures are fit for heaven? See, not everything is fit to be stored in heaven, as it were. Not everything is fit to be valued by a Christian. A sort of negative example of this, I mentioned that my wallet got stolen a couple of years ago out of my car. My Social Security card was in that wallet. And I learned, first of all, that when you call the Department of Social Security, when you call them and let them know that your wallet has been stolen and that your Social Security card was in your wallet, the first thing that happens is you get yelled at about not keeping your Social Security card in a safer place. That's a big no-no, by the way. And some of you are sitting here thinking, yeah, Chris, what are you doing? Your laughter is agreement. But it wasn't fit for that. It should have been in a safe deposit box somewhere. Or at least somewhere secure in my house. Even underneath my pillow would have been a better spot for it than out in the open. There are some things not fit for that those deserve a better place. And at the same time, there are some things that if I were to put them in a safe deposit box or something like that, you'd wonder, what is this guy doing? He's paying this money. He has this limited space. It's meant for these very valuable things, and he's got a bottle of water in there. Why? It doesn't make sense. It's not fit for it. And so we ask ourselves the question this morning, what treasures are fit for heaven? First of all, and this should be painfully obvious, nothing physical. If it's not going to be in the next life in any capacity, if it's not going to be in heaven once this world is past, it doesn't belong in heaven. Heaven being a spiritual existence means that physical things in this world, Physical items, possessions are not where I should put stock. He's not saying don't have wealth. He's not saying don't have things. After all, the fact is, that's sort of how this world works. If I want to get from place to place, I have to have the means to do it. I mean, even in something as simple as we've talked about EEM and we've talked about this $1 Million Sunday, and one of the things they try and do is get a Bible into everyone's hand. That takes physical resources. It's not an admonition against that, but putting our stock in those things, finding those things more valuable than spiritual things, finding those things more valuable than what we might say is what really matters in this life, doesn't make sense, because I'm not taking it with me anyway. It doesn't make sense because the place that I'm supposed to store things that are valuable to me isn't physical. It doesn't belong, and it shouldn't belong. Also, not relationships that translate poorly. See, everything that gets stored up in heaven is not physical. It can't be physical. But not everything that is physical gets stored up in heaven. I have many different relationships in my life. Everything from my relationship with my wife and my son and our yet to be determined gendered baby, to other family relationships and friendships and acquaintances and whatnot. And those are all inherently, I would say, good things. Those are all things that deserve my attention. But sometimes we sort of focus too much on the wrong relationships, as it were. Not that the relationship itself is wrong, but I care too much about that at the expense of what really matters in this life. I have many, many friends from different parts of the country. I have many friends living in Tennessee, New Hampshire, Missouri, and Georgia growing up. I've got friends, at least in the eastern half of the U.S., right? And I'm thankful for those people. I've got many networks out in different areas of the country, and I'm thankful for those things. But I shouldn't, especially with those secular relationships, I don't put those in a place at the expense of my Christian relationships, at the expense of a relationship with my Christian brothers and sisters, at the expense of my family. And a very practical way of looking at this is this. Am I spending more time and effort fostering relationships within my own family, relationships within the church, relationships with other Christians, or am I spending time fostering relationships with people that don't care about the church, don't care about what Christ has to say? Those relationships, and while I don't necessarily know how relationships are going to work in heaven other than there's apparently not marriage, it sounded very angry. I didn't mean for it to sound angry. Other than the fact that there's not marriage, we don't know much about relationships in heaven. But I do know that those in heaven will consist of the church, those that have given their lives to Christ. And that if it is true that that's the case, then I should focus on those relationships. Even if it's at the expense of others, but certainly not the other way around. Also, not my life situation. I got a lot of things going on in my life, and many of you do too. A lot of things that I'm interested in. A lot of different things that I've been interested in at different points in my life. Some of you may have different jobs that you're working right now. Different jobs that maybe you've been at that for your career for years and years and years now. Some of you maybe have different hobbies that you're very invested in. And again, there's nothing wrong, at least inherently, at least without not knowing more, there's nothing wrong inherently with any of that. Granted, if a hobby or a job is inherently sinful, that might be a different question, but having a job that you care about, having a hobby that you care about, Having something in your life that you care about isn't inherently sinful. But when I dedicate time and energy and resources to those things at the expense of what really matters, that's when it becomes a problem. When we focus so much on our work that we don't spend time with our families. When we focus so much on our hobby and what we just enjoy doing off on ourselves, or maybe with a particular group, that we don't spend time with the church. And when we pour resources into things that we like to have or events that we like to go to, instead of pouring time, effort, and perhaps monetary resources into, well, church work, making lasting relationships with people, helping people know Jesus, that becomes a problem. Again, it's not an issue of just simply having and doing those things, but putting too much of an emphasis on things that won't be a part of your heavenly experience is problematic. Putting too much of an emphasis on things that once you die will no longer be a part of what you do and who you are is problematic. What treasures are fit for heaven? Only spiritually valuable traits and relationships. We talk about the fruit of the Spirit. I believe that was the God's Tots theme last year. Is that right? Fruit of the Spirit, at least in the summer class. But that's what a Christian should focus on. Developing those things and pursuing things that help you develop those things. It's okay to work on yourself. It's okay to spend time and money trying to make yourself a better person. Just be sure that better person that you're trying to make yourself into is the one that's defined biblically and not by the world. Is the one that's defined within Scripture, following after the example of Christ. And not worldly traits that might just happen to be in season, as it were. And those relationships. I think about this, I think about family, focusing on different members of my family, be it my immediate family sitting in the pew there, my immediate family as in my sisters, parents, in-laws is awkward, in-laws, other family, focusing on those things as best I can. See, I might be able to have some influence on a few people that I come into contact within a hobby. It's hard for me to say come into contact in work, at least personally, because I work here. So that's sort of inherent. But in other positions that I've held, I might be able to come into contact with people, and I might be able to have some influence in their lives. And I certainly should strive to have a godly spiritual influence that helps lead them to Christ. But I know for a fact that I have an influence on my children. I know for a fact that my family cares about what I do. And that some of them look to me as an example, at least in certain areas. I know for a fact that for some people, they consider me as an example. Working with those people, recognizing that there are people that we have influence over. Not that we wield it in a manipulative way. That we understand that we spend time with people. We foster relationships with people that might help lead them to Christ. Understanding that, to be completely frank, there are some people that we know inherently are going to respond. Not in the sense that we abandon other people. But at the same time, I don't give up time that I could be using to help my children, to help my family grow closer to Christ, at the expense of just doing something I enjoy. I don't give up resources that could be used to foster better relationships with people in the church at the expense of just doing something I think is fun. Nothing wrong with having hobbies, nothing wrong with having jobs that require some of your attention. But don't let those things take the place of what's truly important. And then finally, about heaven, we understand that it's a place of flawless security. You'll notice what Jesus says here in the second half of verse 26. Neither moth nor rust destroys. Thieves do not break in and steal. It's a spiritual existence. What I want you to realize this morning is that those traits, those fruit of the Spirit that we might foster in ourselves, those relationships that we might have, that influence we tried to build to help lead people to Jesus, the ways that I try and make myself better for Christ, to try and fall in line with His will, we need to realize that nothing, no outside force can take those things away from me. That if I'm working to try and be better for Christ, if I'm working to fall in line with His will, there's not an outside force that can come in and strip me of that. And while, yes, there are people that might be able to come in from the outside and try and damage relationships that I have with others, but at the very least on my end, if I'm steadfast and perhaps headstrong in trying to do these things, there's not an outside force that can take them from me. While, yes, we talk about this with regard to heaven, we talk about this with what's to come, it's true right now as well. That those things, those godly things that I try and foster, can't be destroyed by an outside force. They can only be destroyed if I abandon them. And then finally this morning, the location of the heart. Just a couple of points here and then we'll finish. Verse 21, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. You're drawn to what you consider valuable. Period. Here's a test for you. The next time you walk inside your house, you open the door, and I'm going to say the next time you do this without small children, because small children will grab your attention very quickly. But the next time you walk in your house, see immediately, think to yourself immediately, where are your eyes going the first thing you walk in, your first step in the house? What do you look to check? There are a few places I look to check. There are a few things in my house that I don't really want stolen, right? And so I check to see if they're still there. I do it sort of subconsciously at times. I don't run around with the checklist, is that still there, is that still there, is that still there? But at the same time, I look out and I say, all right, yeah, okay, we can go. I've gotten a little bit more paranoid about this with cars in the past couple of years. When we walk out of a restaurant or something, I look to be sure, yeah, the car's still there. See, these are things that maybe subconsciously, these are things that have some value to me. They're not the most valuable things in this life to me, at least I hope not, but they have some value to me. I'm drawn to those things because of that. And so if I consider my self-worth for God, or not my self-worth, but my worth to God, if I consider how I'm living life like Jesus lived, how I'm trying to be a faithful servant of His valuable, if I consider my relationships with my family, with my Christian family, with those around me to be valuable, that's where my attention will be drawn. That's where I will focus. And those are the things that I'll genuinely care about. Finally this morning, and my throat's about dead. Place your desire where you want to be, not where you are. It's an old maxim within well, business. That you dress and prepare for the job that you want, not the job that you have. And in the same way, in this life, you live toward, if we can say that, you live for the place you want to be, not necessarily the place you are. You put your desires toward where you're going to be as a Christian, as a faithful Christian, not where you are right now. When I put my desire in heaven, when I put my desire in doing the will of God, when I honestly and earnestly try and do those things, that's where I'm going to be drawn toward. It's on me to be sure that I'm actually working toward those things. It's on me to be sure that I'm actually working toward those things that actually matter. And perhaps sharing with others what actually matters to me. Maybe it is this morning as a Christian, you've struggled with this. You're not living your life as someone who values heaven, a relationship with Jesus, an eternity at home with God above all else. If you're prepared as a Christian, we'd love to pray with you. We'd love to pray for you. Maybe you need to ask God's forgiveness publicly. Maybe it is this morning you're not a Christian. You've not been baptized into Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection, but you're prepared to do so. Again, we would love to help you. If you have any need, please come forward as we stand and sing.
I've wandered far away from God. Now I'm coming home. The paths of sin too long I've trod. Lord, I'm coming home. Coming home, coming home. Never more to roam. Open wide thine arms of love. Lord, I'm coming home. I've wasted many precious years. Now I'm coming home. I've now repent with bitter tears. Lord, I'm coming home. Coming home, coming home. Never more to roam. Open wide thine arms of love. Lord, I'm coming home. My soul is sick, my heart is sore. Now I'm coming home. My strength renew, my hope restore. Lord, I'm coming home. Coming home, coming home. Never more to roam. Open wide thine arms of love. Lord, I'm coming home. Let's close with 898. You know, if you walk out of the theater and you realize your 57 Chevrolet has been stolen, that's something. But if you walk out and your Hyundai Tucson's gone, it's not any big deal. 898. As I travel through life with its trouble and strife, I've a glorious hope to give cheer on the way. Soon my toil will be o'er, and I'll rest on that shore where the night has been turned into day. Up in the beautiful Paradise Valley, by the side of the river of life. Up in the valley, the wonderful valley, we'll be free from all pain and all strife. There we shall live in the rose-tinted garden, neath the shade of the evergreen tree. How I long for the Paradise Valley, where the beauty of heaven I'll see. Though your garden is rare, it is not to compare with the flowers that bloom in the garden above. In the midst of it grows Sharon's perfect sweet rose. 'Tis the wonderful flower of love. Up in the beautiful Paradise Valley, by the side of the river of life. Up in the valley, the wonderful valley, we'll be free from all pain and all strife. There we shall live in the rose-tinted garden, in the shade of the evergreen tree. How I long for the Paradise Valley, where the beauty of heaven I'll see.
Pray. God, thank you for this day and for the time that you allowed us to have here. Just be with anybody that couldn't make it. Bring them back safely. Be with anyone traveling. Bring them back safely. Be with anybody who's sick. Heal them. Be with the doctors. Be with the men and women overseas. Keep them from harm's way. Thank you for Jesus. In his name we pray. Amen.